What are you doing?
Hello, welcome to Hop at Home. Tonight we are bringing you a conversation between Pico Iyer and our friends from Ragamala Dance Company, Ranee and Aparna Ramaswamy. Welcome, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You want to start?
Hi, Michael. It's wonderful to see you, and we are very happy to be here.
Yes, so tonight we're going to actually be sharing a conversation that you all had, a conversation you're really excited to be having with the essayist Pico Iyer, someone who you guys have admired for a while. Pico wasn't able to join us live, but we were able to have a long-form conversation between you folks, and we're going to be sharing with the audience excerpts from that conversation. Then we will be opening it up to any questions that come in from the chat. Do you guys want to just share a little bit why you were excited to talk about Pico and talk with him?
I'll take it. I read his Lady and the Monk about 10 years ago and thoroughly enjoyed the book. And then I had an opportunity to meet him, see him in Chicago, and tell him personally how much I enjoyed the book. And we talked about some of our productions and his newest book, Autumn Light. So that's one of the reasons. I mean, I'm a huge fan of his.
Well, he's a fan of yours as well, and it was a fascinating conversation. And let's share the first several minutes of it, and then we'll come back to you folks.
Hi, Pico.
Hi, nice to see you again.
Very, very nice to see you and to be here.
I think just to introduce myself to the audience, if they don't know, as you were saying, I've been a writer for 38 years now, writing nonfiction and novels and essays and screenplays, everything possible. And I've been living in suburban Japan 32 years, but much more to the point, I'm so excited. I'm coming to Dartmouth for the first time ever this October to be a Montgomery Fellow. And I couldn't believe the serendipity or magic when I found that both of you are coming to Dartmouth more or less in the same season, and we get to converge there too.
You are absolutely correct that it is so serendipitous that we all have a connection to Dartmouth in these years and at this time. Dartmouth is commissioning, and the Hopkins Center at Dartmouth is commissioning our newest dance work, The Fires of Varanasi. And so it just was an incredible coincidence when we expressed to Mary Lou what fans we are of you and your writing, and she suggested that perhaps there was some way that we could all connect.
Now, reading your writing, I found that there are similarities between your writing and our form of dance, which is Bharatanatyam from the southern part of India. So Bharatanatyam is like a yoga, which is where you seek stillness and concentration while all your senses are working, and your feet, you're moving them rhythmically, your arms, you're telling a story, you are communicating with the audience, but at the same time, you're also finding that stillness. You often write and speak about stillness in your articles and in your book. And could you talk a little bit about how you find that in your writing?
Well, I think many people associate me with travel, and I've been lucky to travel around the world quite a bit. But for every 10 days I spend in Varanasi, for example, I spend probably 10 weeks back at home. And every writer, but I think every artist, I'm sure you too, know that really one prepares oneself for a work, one makes sense of it, one decides where to go by sitting very, very still. It's like breathing in and breathing out. And I often feel that we can only really be moved when we're sitting still. So all the physical movement I've done in my life is just really a preparation for sitting very still and trying to awaken new continents inside myself. But I think we'll be coming back to that in a little bit. And in the meantime, I just want to say how really honored I am to talk to both of you. I never forget our meeting in Chicago in 2010 at the annual conference of Dance USA. I'm somebody who can barely walk across the room without falling on my face, so I didn't know I'd been invited to a dance conference. And I think when I first met you, briefly in Chicago, you, Aparna, said that certain things I'd said about home resonated with you. And I'm wondering if you remember what that might be.
That day you spoke about your very unique background and how it has really influence your perspective and your writing, and how notions of home and identity are fluid, and how they spark creativity with all of us. And with those words, it really did set me on a new path, because as a person who was born in India and raised in the United States, I did spend 4 months a year growing up in India, so I really find myself always calling myself as having lived a dual existence. And I found myself always, however, thinking of my life as two points, running from one point rapidly towards another point, and forgetting what came in between. And with your words, what it really made me think about is the importance of that journey in between 2 points, and how that journey really is the bedrock of my practice. I would love for you to talk about your hybrid background and how that has influenced your perspective of the world and your writing as well.
It really strikes me that in the 21st century, so many people are living, as you said, in the passageways between places, the conspiracies between places, the mutual fascination between different parts of the globe. And I think, just as for both of you in different ways, for me, home has always been almost a mosaic of all the different places and people that have made me up. And it's almost like a stained glass whole, but one that's shifting. So in a very practical way, again, like both of you, I was born in Oxford, England, to parents, both of whom were from India, but my mother was from North India, my father was from South India, and so actually their only common language was English. I never even heard any of India's languages spoken as a little boy. And then when I was 7 years old, we moved to California. So suddenly I was this funny little boy with an Indian face and an English voice and an American green card. And I think even then, as you were saying about you having 2 homes, I was thinking how lucky and unusual I am, because I have 3 homes and I can bring them into different combinations. I can mix and match. I can see California with Indian eyes and see India with English eyes. And when I visit Japan, say, I can see things in a different way because I'm bringing 3 sets of eyes to this. And I think growing up in the 1960s in England, I actually never saw another dark-skinned person. England was very homogeneous then. And so my position seemed so uncommon. And I never could have guessed that within a couple of generations, it would almost become the norm. I think if I were in Minneapolis now, or Hanover, or certainly London, or Sydney, or Toronto, most of the kids I meet would be much more international than I am. And they would think, oh, you only have 3 cultures. You're such a simple person. And so, yes, I've always felt that home has much less to do with where you come from than where you're going, in some ways. That's the important thing. But having said all that, it really, as it were, came home to me one day, many years ago. I was in my family home here in California, and I saw this distant line of orange cutting through a hillside. And so I went down to call the fire department. When I came up again, our house was completely encircled by 70-foot flames in what was at that point the worst forest fire in Californian history. And so 3 hours later, our house, every last thing in it, except for me and my mother's cat, was razed to the ground, reduced to ash. And that night I went to sleep on a friend's floor, and I went to a supermarket and I bought a toothbrush. And that was really the only thing I had in the world. And so literally the next morning when I woke up, if somebody said to me, "Where's your home?" I couldn't point to any physical construction. My home would have to be whatever I carried around inside me. And that really confirmed that lifelong intuition that home is not, as you were saying, where you live, it's what lives inside you.
I was brought up in a very secluded, guarded, void of any Western influence at home, learning music, classical South Indian dance, learning mantras, cooking, but also sent to a Catholic convent run by European nuns. So there I spoke English, and I had friends who were Christian, Muslim, Jain, Hindu, and read Arthur Haley and listened to the Beatles, where my parents were not listening, and then coming home and reading the Mahabharata and Ramayana.
When we moved to this country as first generation immigrants from India, we lived a very typical immigrant life, where you feel that you are more an observer than a participant. And when I was 8 years old, we met our teacher, Alarmel, here in Minnesota. So if you hear about a mother and daughter with our backgrounds creating, it would be natural to assume that Ranee would look back at her tradition and want to create in that way, and that I would perhaps find themes from my American life to create. But we're exactly the opposite. As Ranee said, she found so much curiosity in the collaborative potential here in the United States. And I took my deep desire for my Indian culture and to mine the literature and the poetry, the music and the dance of India.
It's fascinating. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking my mother, sari-clad mother, who's spent her first 21 years in India and then went to England and then came here, only learned Sanskrit when she arrived in California and then became a professor of Sanskrit here in California.
So nice to hear that conversation again, and the warmth and generosity you guys were sharing. I'd love to pick up the end of that thread where you guys were talking about these intersectional identities and really ground it in the work of your company now. We've been lucky to have you both presenting your work, and you've been in residence at the Hop a few times and gotten to hang out in the Hop garage and visit the Courtyard Cafe and all the joys of the Hopkins Center. So when you are developing this new work and with your company in Minnesota, can you talk about the issues of identity and how you approach it as a company?
So, Michael, first I want to say hi. I didn't get a chance to say hello to you and to everybody else, and thank you so much for having us. So, as you heard, Ranee and I are daughter and mother, and we work together. In essence, we have grown up together here in this country, really integrating our backgrounds and using that as fertile ground for the work that we create now. Our company, so together with my sister Ashwini and our dancers, is Ragamala Dance Company. And our work is rooted in the South Indian classical dance form of Bharatanatyam. And we feel that this language of Bharatanatyam is a living language, and we use that to create works that express our personally culturally hybridic lives. And so we were so fortunate to spend time at Dartmouth this past year, as you said, and we had two immersive creative residencies, one in October and one in February with our company. And in the first one, we worked on a large-scale visual art installation that will accompany our new work, Fires of Varanasi. And in the second, we worked on the choreographic elements for the stage piece of Fires of Varanasi. And in both of those visits, we were so happy and felt so fortunate to spend time with the Hopkins community, with the Dartmouth community, and the larger Hanover community as well, really sharing our artistic practice and the progress we were making on this work. So as you mentioned, we are creating a new work, The Fires of Varanasi, and in that work, we explore the Hindu conviction that life and death are part of an integrated whole. And we see the city of Varanasi, in a city that is almost, one could say, spiritually electric, as a metaphor for that interconnectedness. So through this project, we're very interested in sharing our rituals and philosophies, and also how they remain and change in the diaspora, and exploring how that situation may arise or emerge for our neighbors and the communities which we visit as well.
So you and Pico seem to both be inspired by this one city. You know, he's written about it as well, and it's the subject of your new work. You guys did get to talk a little bit about that. Let's play that clip from your conversation.
For those of you who've never been to Varanasi, the reason I titled my essay Flames of Heaven is that when you walk through this central holy city of Hinduism in northern India, at its heart is the river Ganges, and it stretches for 3 miles, and at one end are the bonfires on which dead bodies are being burnt so that the ashes can be committed instantly to the river. So right along the river, in one place, 100 bodies are burnt every day. And sometimes you'll go there are 6 or 7 bonfires, but constantly, round the clock, 24 hours, dead bodies are being carried to be burnt along the river. So visually, the main image at nighttime when you walk along the river in Varanasi are just of these huge fires burning, consuming dead bodies that will be sent back into the river and enter the cycle of reincarnation and maybe of liberation too. So you can't go to Varanasi without being struck by the fact it's a city of fire, and that's the image that literally burns itself into your memory.
As you know, and as we've said many times, your writing about Varanasi, specifically your article Maximum India, has very much influenced our imagination and our thinking of and drawing upon images for our stage work, Fires of Varanasi. In your article, you brought the city to such delightful life, and you've written so eloquently about the Varanasi of today, but then you purposefully weave together the philosophical and the mysterious undercurrents of that city.
Thank you. I love that word, mysterious. And I think one of the first things that really startled me about Varanasi, I think every visitor says the same thing. It's India to the max. It's confusion, noise, intensity, shocking, unsettling, powerful, all at once, like a hallucination almost. But what really struck me was that this city of death in some ways was a city of light. And I think I found out that Varanasi's original name was Kashi, which means city of light, and also that this city of death was a city of joy. And what struck me as I was walking around the very narrow passageways of the old city was that people would constantly, as you know, keep running through those passageways carrying stretchers with dead or dying bodies on them. But they were singing with joy. There were gold shawls over the bodies. There was nothing about mournfulness. It was much more a celebration and delight in the fact that these fortunate bodies were able to be burned next to the sacred river. And I think traditional Hindus would say, therefore, to receive moksha, liberation. And therefore, in so many ways, Varanasi turns one on one's head and turns one's ideas on one's head. Now, for you, because your connections with your roots are much stronger than mine, when you went to Varanasi, it must have been a different experience. You weren't newcomers the way I was.
I was there more as taking in artistic images than being a pilgrim. What touched me was to see the pilgrims that were so deeply engaged in their prayers, in their inward thinking. Now, the most beautiful thing I witnessed was standing by the Ganges at 4 a.m. in the morning and watching life go by. You know, children were playing in the water, people bathing, and all my life I have heard the word Ganga said with such reverence. All of us have little containers of water in our homes ready to be poured into the dying people's lips when there are older people in the home. And here, the mythology was right in front of you. And to then later when traditionally it's the boys, not the girls, that do the death ceremony for their parents. So my brother, traditionally, he cremated the body of my dad and he took the ashes to the Ganges and scattered it there. And it makes me feel so happy that my father is part of that mythology.
What really struck me was that this city of death in some ways was a city of light. And I think I found out that Varanasi's original name was Kashi, which means city of light, and also that this city of death was a city of joy. And what struck me as I was walking around the very narrow passageways of the old city was that people would constantly, as you know, keep running through those passageways carrying stretchers with dead or dying bodies on them. But they were singing with joy. There were gold shawls over the bodies. There was nothing about mournfulness. It was much more a celebration and delight in the fact that these fortunate bodies were able to be burned next to the sacred river. And I think traditional Hindus would say, therefore, to receive moksha, liberation. and death, which we're so apt to think of as the end of things and as a moment of sadness, there seemed to be a moment of jubilation and the beginning of many things too, especially if you believe in reincarnation. And I also love the way that this holy city magnetizes people of every kind of faith. I was just remembering this morning there were 1,400 mosques in Varanasi, and I saw people taking off on the Hajj. The Buddha delivered his first discourse 6 miles from Varanasi in the deer park in Sarnath. So it's one of these spiritual centers. And it's like a spell. When you're there, I just didn't know how to get out of it. I think the great musicians of India, the great philosophers, they've all come from and returned to Varanasi. So for me, it was a way to encounter the Hinduism of my birth that I've never known enough about. As I was listening to you, I was thinking, I am burning to ask this question, because these are very philosophical, metaphysical ideas. How do you embody them?
Yes.
As spiritual beings.
So in Bharatanatyam, we have a saying that a dancer experiences so many emotions during one performance that she will never be reincarnated. She will never come back to this earth. And so in some ways, in some sense, our dance connects joy and death. In so many of our pieces, we represent the soul yearning joyfully for transcendence and union with the divine. Again, that is a complete joyful participation, as you say. And so in this piece, we are very interested in sharing that yearning and that immediacy and that fervor of transcendence and of seeking, and that joyful union that we all hope to have. And this is actually, these are principles and feelings, and I would say deep longing that exists in so much of our Indian music and our Indian poetry, that it's a very comfortable thought for Indians, this idea of joy and longing and fervor. And so, for example, in this piece that we're creating, we are using some poetry by a 6th century South Indian, a Tamilian female saint poet. Her name is Karaikal Ammayar, and she comes from the Bhakti tradition. And her poetry is about her deep longing for the deity Shiva, as you said, the reigning deity of Varanasi. And she longs to shed all of her attachments, her body, her gender, even her skin, so she can become the essence of that longing itself. However, she also oscillates between demanding attention from the divine and becoming subservient to the divine, showing that she has an extremely personal relationship, and she traverses all of those aspects of and the nuances of that relationship with the divine.
I love that you brought the word longing into this, because that's the heart of everything, really. It's beautiful. And it also speaks for that sense I was saying, that we define ourselves by where we're going, what we're longing for, the place we want to be, as much as just the house where we happen to grow up.
Diane Eck, Varanasi scholar, writes that for Hindus, death is not the opposite of life, rather the opposite of birth. And you say in your writing, it is similar to leaving a cinema by a different door than the one you came in by.
That book you generously mentioned, Autumn Light, as you remember, it begins with my father-in-law's death, the death of my Japanese father-in-law. And what struck me, because I'd never witnessed a Japanese funeral before, and maybe this is akin to what you experienced in Varanasi, was that after he died, we had a big meal with his body right in the middle. People gave him his favorite kind of beer, served him his favorite food. 7 years on now, it's 7 years since he died, every morning my wife wakes up very, very early. She prepares his favorite kind of tea and his favorite snack and puts it out for him in the household altar. As soon as his body was cremated, this is an unusual custom in Japan, all the family members gather with chopsticks and with delight and gratitude, and they pick out bones to keep in their household altars, very much giving them the sense, as you said in the quote from Diana Eck, the dead haven't gone away. They're just in another room. They're in another state of being, but they're very much with us. And after my wife lost her father, he was probably more present to her even than when he'd been alive. She'd literally dream about him and feel that he was walking and talking through her.
So when we first started this project, we titled it Sacred Fire, Bone Within Ash, because we imagined that when after the cremation there were these bones left over, and the bones were what really represented our memories, our ancestors, and our move as we shift to new countries, what we hold with us.
So this city is clearly incredible and of global significance over hundreds of years. And these rituals that you and Pico are talking about, whether it's your own tradition or Japanese culture, are these grand historical rituals. But it seems like there was this personal side to things. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your inspiration. And there's many spiritual paths you can take, and you guys decided to settle on Varanasi in this exploration. Talk to us about what the inspiration for the project was.
Sure. The inspiration came when my father passed away in the United States about 4 years ago. And he was cremated here, and my brother took his ashes to the Ganges and scattered it there. Now, Varanasi became more personal to us then because my father was part of that, the river and the city itself. Now, Hindus believe in reincarnation, that to know that everything that we have worked for example, an art you have practiced all your life, the knowledge that you have gained, the karmas, the good and the bad, that they will all end when you die, seems so final. Whereas we believe that all of that continues in your next birth, which gives a lot of hope and resilience. Now, in India, we have 1 billion people believe in this. And in the United States, we have Indian immigrants, Hindu immigrants, who bring this hope and resilience to this country. So Varanasi is a symbol of this belief. So we decided that we would make this piece as a celebration to this really wonderful, brilliant city.
And we've been really fortunate to see the piece come together slowly. We are so excited to both be part of the process, and obviously sometime when we can be together to see it actually play out on the stage. You were just talking about some of these rituals, and you and Pico did end up talking a little bit about not just the rituals, but daily practice, his craft as a writer, your craft as Bharatanatyam practitioners, as dance artists. I'd love to play that clip, and then I'd love to take some questions from the chat if there are any.
So as I was listening to both of you talk, and especially as you were evoking for me the fires of Varanasi, I was thinking that for a writer, so I do nearly all my work by myself at my desk in the middle of nowhere. And a writer's job is to perform as little as possible and to confess as much as possible. In other words, he doesn't want to be playing to a crowd. He wants to be whispering secrets that maybe are unknown even to himself to something beyond him. The writing is strong in proportion to the fact that it's not on stage, but it's a very, very private thing that even the writer may be surprised by. Your work needs an audience, and your audience in South India would know a lot about Bharatanatyam and what is behind it. Your audiences in Minneapolis or New Hampshire maybe less so. Are there things that you do to bring yourself to that state where transcendence is a greater possibility?
Pico, it's what you're describing is so similar to our process as well. Your desk, instead of a desk, we have a studio. And every day when we are there by ourselves, there are days when, as you say, you may surprise yourself. There are days where you forget oneself. It becomes a meditation and a prayer, and it becomes a space for limitless joy and frustration. But
Yes.
all of those are very honest and truthful states of being, and that's what we hope to bring during our performances. So as you say, it's much less of a performance and much more of an honest communication with the world around us and the people in that room. So when we are performing, when we're preparing, and the preparation for us is also a physical preparation where we are getting into the makeup and the costume, and that takes about 3 hours for us. And if you think of it as that is our opportunity to transform from our regular selves into perhaps becoming a medium where we can communicate between this world and with the divine.
Thank you. Gosh, that's a radiant answer. Sometimes I'll tell my friends, well, I feel abashed because I've never meditated in my life. And if my wife is around, she'll fall around laughing. And she says, all you do every morning, you get up, you go to your desk, you just sit there for 5 hours, not moving. If that's not meditation, I don't know what is. And that in some ways, writing is my spiritual practice. And just as you so beautifully said, with your dance, you're trying to make a space for the divine to speak through you and to visit everybody around you.
So you all are talking about this practice of channeling something internal that then becomes a huge external expression on the stage as a dance artist. Clearly, you've done a lot of thinking about this. To those who are not familiar with Bharatanatyam and really what you're going for as a dancer, can you guys share a little bit about that?
Yes. So as we said, and as I said, in every practice and performance, we hope to feel that we've lived a lifetime of truthful emotion. We yearn for that. That is what we strive for. And so I think, Michael, I'll repeat, I think you might enjoy this, a story that our teacher just recently shared. And it's about the iconic dancer, Bharatanatyam dancer, Srimati Balasaraswati. And so in the story, it's said that she is talking to her daughter, who is concerned about the audience at a certain performance. And so Srimati Balasaraswati looks at her daughter and says, it is not about who is here or who isn't here. Your art is between you and your maker. And for that just encapsulates how we feel about our experience of dance.
So that's such a fascinating quote. And obviously, Bala Saraswati, so famous for dancing, but also for bringing that form and the ideas across to the West, really.
Oh, yes.
Can you talk a little bit just about your how you are introducing that form to the communities like Hanover, communities in Minnesota, all over the country, and what you've seen in the last decades of a growing understanding of the form and where you're taking it?
You want to start? Well, I guess I will speak. So when we, and I'll speak for Ranee, when she first started teaching and practicing here in Minnesota, she was and remains extremely committed to sharing this art form with everybody, believing in its power to unite us, its power to communicate, and to really experience this universal emotion. The fact that this art form is not a museum piece, it may have ancient roots, but it continues to remain relevant and evolving and rich. And we always, in our study, in our practice, we always say that the art is much bigger than you. And when you are driven by that mentality, you really feel that you want to share that with everybody. And so from a very early age, Ranee and I would perform everywhere, and we would, and of course started by Ranee, she would constantly be teaching and explaining and sharing and developing with the audience a technique for understanding and watching Bharatanatyam and understanding that it is something that we can all appreciate rather than something that represents another culture. And so that ethos is one that we have carried forward in our work. And so when we create work, while we are delving deep into the traditions of South India, we are also, if we are moved to create a work that layers the artistic genres of other cultures, we try to do that in the most, and we work to do that in the most organic, meaningful way, so that we see the similarities and we see those connections of cultures, and that brings about our shared humanity through these art forms. And so the work that we do, we feel reaches out to a broader audience, and we maintain that commitment to speaking to audiences, sharing widely, talking about why we are moved to create the work we create. And so we hope that we have continued the audience for this great art form, and we are so privileged to have a platform for sharing our vision of this art form with this country.
And we at the Hop were fortunate to be able to see one example of this a couple of years ago in your musical collaboration with Amir El-Safar, right? So clearly you're not just interested in representing Indian identity and Indian cultures, but really finding this intermelding. Ranee, did you have anything to add to that?
Aparna said it so beautifully. For so long, even though we are mother and daughter, to have this opportunity for the last 40 years to work with two children and to bring this art form to all audiences is really amazing. It's a great experience.
So you guys were talking about the process of the practice of using movement to transport people and to channel the divine, to channel a city of Varanasi, journeys throughout lives, a journey across the globe, all this far-reaching grand stuff. I have to be honest, I'm feeling like this is particularly poignant in this moment when we're stuck here in our homes. And you and Pico managed to talk a little bit about just how you're managing and how you're able to try to continue your practice and try to continue the big global reach that your work has in this moment. So let's roll that clip and then we'll talk a little more.
During this curious moment of COVID-19, I felt embarrassed in some ways because my life continues very much as it always does. I practice social distancing for a living, more or less, and every day I'm just in my house writing, taking a couple of walks, reading, and spending time with my wife. And so my life today is very similar to my life a year ago or 10 years ago, or I hope 10 years from now. I think of your lives as to some extent requiring an audience and needing to share your art with everybody. So has it been difficult for you first to practice and then also to visualize your dances in this time when you have probably no contact with an audience for many weeks?
The isolation seems like a place for reflection. It's a space for reflection. And I think someone asked, how can you be global when we are all isolated? But I think this is the time when globalization, we are post-global at this moment. We are in conversation with our lighting designer, set designer, who lives in France. Our musicians live in India. A composer lives in a different part of India. A couple of our dancers live in Maryland and North Carolina. And we are still having rehearsals through using Zoom.
Yes, you're so right. And I remember, in the last few years, all I've been hearing from my friends is, I'm overwhelmed. I don't have enough time to contact my friends. I never get to see my family. I never get to take a walk or read a book or listen to music or attend a dance performance. And as you say, this moment suddenly has given us the chance that something inside us has been longing for, has been aching for, without which we're really insufficient. And I think more and more people now are saying that this enforced pause is the perfect moment to rethink our habits and to remember our priorities, what really we love and what sustains us, and then to reorient our lives to include more of that element and to make sure that we're making a life as well as making a living. And 6 years ago, the people who ran the TED Talks asked me to write a little book called The Art of Stillness, precisely because they realized that stillness is what most of us didn't have enough of in our lives and was craving. I so loved what Ranee was saying about this is the global moment, partly because you really are working with colleagues everywhere in the world, but also I think there's a sense of universalism right now. Your colleagues in India and France and North Carolina are all basically in the same position as you or me.
Yes.
And this moment has actually brought us all together, literally, because here I am getting finally to have a conversation with you, thanks to Zoom. We met 10 years ago, but this is our first real conversation. But also, we all know that whether you're rich or poor, or dark-skinned or light-skinned, you're basically facing the same challenge, which is the same opportunity now, as Aparna was saying, to remember what we've been missing in our lives, I think.
He put such a positive spin on this moment. I'm so inspired to be more mindful about taking advantage of this time.
I love that sentiment. We need to make a life, not just a living.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It seems like we should probably spend, weeks or months thinking about that and then making some decisions about ourselves. So we've had a little bit of time, and you've had a little bit of time to digest the conversation that you had just over a week ago. And I'm just curious, how is that percolated through your thinking process? Do you think it's going to inform the work Fires of Varanasi that you're developing, or just how you spend the next little bit of time?
Do you want to talk about that?
You talk about Varanasi and Pico.
We're throwing this ball back and forth, as you can see. Well, Michael, having read a lot of Pico's writing, and I'm sure you have as well, I am struck by his remarkably vivid writing and how he brings to life so beautifully interior and exterior landscapes. And you hear through all of his words how he is always really shining a light on the importance of our interior landscape. And I am reminded by something our teacher always tells us and speaks about, and she speaks about the inextricable link between word, music, and movement. And the conversation reinforced for me how important it is for an artist to mine an inner quiet, to find that inner quiet and imagination that can come from that in order to construct these nuanced worlds and be able to offer them with truth. In essence, to really be our best selves as we offer them to the world. And that is something that I will constantly return to, both in my life, but also in my artistic practice.
Well, I think that what Pico writes about the stillness and the concentration, and to find time to not just make a living, but to live, is not easy. As we practice with our dance for years and years and years, it's something that we have to purposefully seek. And as a person who is never still in real life, it's going to be a whole lifetime of learning for me.
But I also think, don't you, Michael, that we all do that in our own ways, and I think it's about that mindfulness within the lives that we choose to lead, and finding that is what it's challenging, but it is something that we have control over.
Yeah. So I think clearly the space for mindfulness is there in abundance right now. I'm wondering, with your craft in particular, it's so intricate, so meticulous, and so challenging from someone who tried your masterclass for several minutes. And what about the disruption to just your actual daily practice of getting in with your company members and just spending all those hours just crafting and sweating in your saris together? And how are you finding a way to replace that in this time? Ranee, you mentioned Zoom, but it's got to be more than Zoom. So what are you doing?
Well, in our work, even though we are doing large scale work with many dancers on stage, it's basically each one is a solo dancer. And for that, each of us need to have that time to practice and bring that possibilities of getting all the emotions. I mean, it's like an actor who's training to do the dialogue delivery and be as natural as possible. So we have to work for hours to get that emotional interpretation of the bhava and rasa, as I talk about. Bhava is the emotions and the feeling that the dancer feels, and rasa is what both the audience as well as the performer feels. Now, usually our day-to-day lives are so busy. We are choreographing, we are working with other dancers, we are rehearsing, and what suffers is this time to develop as this solo artist. So the other day when I was talking, I mentioned that probably after all this is over, the audience is going to see a better me, because I'm working on that, developing myself as this soloist who can embody all of these feelings and bring it out as strongly and as emotionally as possible.
Yeah, solo. So I think solo work is getting a lot of attention and focus for dance artists these days. So I have a question from the chat, if that's okay. This is Leon, who's asking about rhythm and meter and what they mean to you, either in words, in music, or of course in movement. Can you share any thought about those and that intersectionality between those forms?
So I just have to say hello, Leon.
Hi.
It's Leon Conrad.
He's from, yes, our friend
from Scotland, from Edinburgh. You answer the question. Oh, then I was so excited to see Leon's name that I missed the question.
Oh, it's about the interplay between words, music, and movement, particularly in Bharatanatyam, and like your favorite meters or rhythms. Clearly, they're intertwined in your form. So, what are your favorites?
Well, I have to say, first of all, I'm going to start again with a quote from my teacher who says, "When one dances, or when one watches dance, one must see the music and hear the dance. And through that, you can also understand the interplay and the importance of both of those aspects, and how music is what inspires our very souls to move. It inspires us to create. It inspires us to emote. And we all can connect to the emotion in a piece of music. And when one talks about music, they talk about melody and rhythm. So of course, melody, like I said, it conducts our heartstrings. And what rhythm can do for us, it is the heartbeat. And so both of those are so, they provide such a visceral feeling to both the audience and the dancer. And I think it inspires that bhava rasa, a relationship that Ranee was talking about. So in terms of favorite, I think you cannot pick favorites. I have identical twins and I don't pick favorites. So
You're well practiced.
Let me add something to that.
Sure.
In our form, there is both a rhythmic section and there is the interpretive or expressive section. So again, quoting my teacher, sometimes people think that the rhythm has to stay just rhythmic and the emotions don't flow into each other. Whereas the music, there is feeling in every step that we perform. So those emotions come out, making each of these rhythmic movements into these beautiful gems, because they shine when there is rhythm and the expressions of the face that come together. So I think both of them are very, very important. And I have twin grandchildren, and I agree with what Aparna said.
So the movement is clearly beautiful, but Ragamala Dance Company, you guys are also known for the beautiful scenic design. And there's a final question from the chat that I'd love to take, which is from Kristen. She's asking about how your experiences in Varanasi actually informed what you're thinking about for the performance and how you're incorporating both those interior and exterior landscapes into Fires of Varanasi as you develop the work?
In Varanasi, there are two things that first catches your eye. One is the river Ganges that's flowing from one end, wherever you can see. And then there are these steps, they're called ghats, and they come down and you walk down this and it leads you to the river. And you can see the whole universe go by on those ghats. There are people who are praying. I saw a man dying on one of those steps. There are children playing. There are women in colorful saris praying to the Ganges River. And so in our set, we have these water bodies on stage, and also the steps that represent the Ganges, the steps that lead down to the river. And there are these rituals that happen in the evening and morning where priests are waving these large lamps and evoking and invoking the gods. And so all of that is incorporated in our performance. And you can, as I mentioned in the talk, there are so many of those pilgrims, they don't even know what is happening outside. They are just completely internalizing their feelings. There are hundreds of people who have walked miles to be in that place, because pilgrimage is not easy. You can plan a pilgrimage, it doesn't always happen. So they have achieved coming to the Ganges is something that people wait all their lives to do. So we are trying to bring that feeling of the internal and the external, and also the joy that Pico Iyer mentioned, the joy that you see everywhere. Even though there are fires burning on one side, you can also see the celebration of this death and a living city.
We are so looking forward to seeing this work and it coming to life, and the time when we can enjoy it in person. And also looking forward to having Pico in some capacity with us in the fall as a Montgomery Fellow. I really wanted to thank both Pico. He's not here. He did manage to find internet enough to join us for our conversation last week. But most importantly, to thank you folks, Ramaswamys, and your whole team for just coming to us in person time and again, and then joining us virtually tonight. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Before we finish, I would like to just say, what is Pico's Varanasi? It's only going to take me a minute. Can I do that?
Sure, please.
So we all know Pico is he's well known globally. He's a thinker. His spiritual, poetic, brilliant writing has captured many readers. His article on Varanasi brought to life the city with all its positive, negative, its religious and shady layers. For us Hindus, Varanasi is sacred, period. Pico's Varanasi is a universal experience. I just had to say that because that's the reason why this whole talk happened. So, thank you, Pico.
Huge thanks to Pico.
Michael, thank you so much. And thank you to Mary Lou and all of you at the Hop. And thank you to Pico for making this possible. We feel so privileged to be a part of this.
Yes, and the conversation and the work will continue. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for all of you watching right now, Hop at Home. Stay with us as we move into the next week of Arts Awards at Dartmouth and a wind ensemble performance. Thank you, Ramaswamys.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.